Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bigfoot Tales. I'm your host, D.L.Soucy, coming to you from the glorious coastline of the state of Maine. And we've got another Bigfoot tale for you today. This one we're going to be talking about Bauman's Bigfoot incident, as made famous by the late, great Theodore Roosevelt, one-time president of the United States of America, and world-renowned big game hunter. Just a little background for this story here. And by the way, you can get this story in full, as well as some of my other Bigfoot tales that I'm sharing here on YouTube in my latest book, Sasquatch, Searching for the Answer, which will be available on Amazon soon, or depending upon when you see this video, may already be there. Just look for the title, Sasquatch, Searching for the Answer. And I'll have the ISBN and information on the book in the information block on this video. But to get into the story, let's do a little background first. In 1893, Theodore Roosevelt published a book called The Wilderness Hunter, and where he tells a lot of different stories and shares some insight and hunting expeditions that he had been on. And he tells one in particular concerning a man named Bauman. And there's a couple of different spellings out there, by the way, that you might find. Bauman was actually of German descent. So you're going to find his name spelled B-A-U-M-A-N-N instead of just one N today. A lot of people have changed that, unfortunately, but Roosevelt spelled his name with just one N in the book. So if you're looking for that particular story as a web search, that's what you're going to want to put in. He discusses various superstitions of the Cowboys during the years that he spent on our western plain states, hunting and camping and fishing and living in general. And he states that frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be very superstitious. And he goes on to say that while he did not hear very many ghost stories whilst living on the plains, he once listened to a goblin story that rather impressed him, which I take to infer that he actually believes that the story is true. Now, there's a little backstory here for those of you that don't know, and maybe you don't care. It doesn't really matter here for practical purposes, but we have to ask whether it's a true story or not. It's not a first-hand story. It's a third-hand story as told to him by somebody else. Now, the Bowman family came from Germany. The original Bauman settlers in the early 1800s. Many of the men in that family were members of the Masonic fraternity, just like Theodore Roosevelt was. Now, here's an interesting thing. There was a Bowman in the same lodge that Roosevelt was a member of in New York State, but also there was a Bowman, an extended cousin, I believe he was. I'm not sure how far away he was from the New York Bowmans, but he was related, that lived in Kansas, where Roosevelt did spend some time living. Now, what we have to ask here is, did Roosevelt become familiar with these people in Kansas at some point, as they were familiar with the New York Bowmans? And which Bowman family did Roosevelt hear the tale from? And we also have to ask whether or not the Germanic tales of the hairy men in the woods come into play in this tale. And one of the episodes I have upcoming is we're going to talk a little bit about the European connections to Bigfoot and the hairy man of the woods. And unfortunately we have to ask a question. Where did the story originate? And it sounds like a perfectly logical story, and it it is perfectly logical that what this story relates to is actually a grizzly bear attack. And grizzlies have been known to kill men simply for the apparent pleasure. And they're about the only bear species that will actually do that. Now, remember, grizzlies have large feet, and therefore they leave large footprints, and they are known to ransack camps in search of food. And there are a lot of other clues in the story that offer suggestions that this is simply a tragic bear attack. The statement made in the story that the beast walked about on two legs seems to suggest a possible Bigfoot link. However, bear tracks can be seen where the front paw prints overlap with the back paw prints, thus resembling a creature walking about on 2 feet. And you have to remember that it would take a true tracking expert to discern the difference. There's a lot of other stories too, but we'll get into, we'll leave that part of it there. And we'll get right into the Bauman story here for your enjoyment and pleasure. But one thing I want to point out here is that there's a lot of tales out there that relate to this creature that some call Bigfoot, some call Sasquatch, others call Yeti, Yaren. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of names for this creature. And we have to ask ourselves over a period of time is what exactly is it that we're looking at? And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish here on Bigfoot Tales is to kind of drill down through all the information that we have and sort of separate out the fact from the fiction to get into what a real definition of what this Bigfoot really is. I've come across some interesting things. I'm not ready at this point in time to share a lot of details, but as time passes, I will, as I have verified those details and made up in my own mind that the details are in fact correct and not just supposition based upon my need to prove the existence of this thing. For me, I don't have to prove the existence of Bigfoot. But other people require proof, and together we can get into this. And while we're talking about togetherness and Bigfoot research, I'm going to take a minute here and advertise a little bit. A Yahoo group. Go to Maine Bigfoot Research in your search engine. You can find the Yahoo group that I'm part of, and we got some hunts coming up, maybe. We're trying to get some stuff together. It's a fledgling group, but hopefully we can expand from that and hopefully develop into a possibly serious Maine Bigfoot Association type of organization. But I'll talk about that in another film. But for now, let's get into Bauman's Bigfoot tale as told by Theodore Roosevelt. And again, this is from the Wilderness Hunter, and I got it from the original publication of 1893 on page 441, if you want to look that up in your local library and get a copy of the story. But here's the story, Bauman's Bigfoot Tale. And again, this is as written by Theodore Roosevelt. Frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be very superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in the things spiritual and supernatural. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and these few were of perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But once, I listened to a goblin story which rather impressed me. It was told by a grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghosts and goblin lore, so that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps, of the snow walkers and the specters, and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. And it may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time and still more in remembrance, weird and elfin traits to what was merely some abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. When the event occurred, Bauman was still a young man, and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Not having had much luck, he and his partner determined to go on up into a particularly wild and lonely pass, through which ran a small stream said to contain many beaver. The pass had an evil reputation because the year before a solitary hunter who had wandered into it was there slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from thence onwards impracticable for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or two daylight left, and after building a brush lean-to and throwing down and opening their packs, they started up a stream. The country was very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although here and there the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk they again reached camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, the tall, close-set pines and firs rising around it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slopes, covered with the unbroken growth of the evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their short absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited the camp, and it had rummaged about amongst their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and, in sheer wantonness, destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting the fire. While Bauman was making ready supper, it already being dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bowman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." Bowman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon again examining the tracks with the torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws, or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up in their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At night, Bauman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong, wild beast odor, and he caught the gloom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable dark blackness of the forest and the night. After this, the 2 men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look at the few traps they had set the previous evening and to put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean-to had again been torn down. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp it had gone along the soft earth and by the brook, where the footprints were as plain as if on snow, and, after a careful scrutiny of the trail, It certainly did seem as if, whatever the thing was, it had walked off on but 2 legs. The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one or the other sitting on guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite, across the brook, and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a peculiarly sinister sound, yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they would shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were the more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing a good deal of game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon they were back within a couple miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fears seemed absurd to the 2 armed men, accustomed as they were, through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bauman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beaver in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked with some uneasiness how low the sun was getting. As he hurried towards camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed on him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays, striking through among the straight trunks, made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the ghostly stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these somber primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay, and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though the thin blue smoke was still curling upward. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and ranged. At first Bowman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that his neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense wood to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking nearby in the woods, waited for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps, and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with his forepaws, while it buried its teeth in its throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled around it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling it over and over, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Bowman, utterly unnerved, and believing that the creature with which he had to deal was something either half-human or half-devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at a speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until far beyond the reach of pursuit. And again, that's the story as told by Teddy Roosevelt in his book, The Wilderness Hunter, which you can find in your local library, and I recommend you visit your local library and make fervent use of the material there in the way of folklore and research dealing with the Bigfoot and the hairy man of the woods folklore. And do some research and some studying and reading, and perhaps after a period of time you'll come to know the story as well as I do. But that's the story today. And again, if you want to hear more about Bauman's story, as well as several other Bigfoot stories, you can read them in my first book on of Sasquatch research, called Sasquatch Searching for the Answer. It's ISBN number 580092368607, and you'll be able to catch that on Amazon pretty soon, if it's not already there, again depending upon when you view this video. The projected time of release on Amazon is about the last week of April 2013 or first week of May time frame. So keep your eyes and ears out. And again, I hope you enjoyed this, and don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. And again, visit Maine Bigfoot Research on Yahoo groups, and if you're from Maine, join up and plug in your 2 cents worth on some of the topics that we have going on there. And you'll be able to find some more information on some upcoming expeditions and hunts that I'm planning, and some other people may be planning as well. So we'll see you there, and until next time, have a good day and enjoy the week, and I'll see you next time on Bigfoot Tales.